we have this mess, which has something to do with the lights. I think it's fuses and things. Hello again. Welcome back to Millennial Wrench. I'm Tyler, and we're back in the shop tonight, continuing our entirely too great of efforts on this piece of junk for the Southern Fried Heaps Rally. Last time we got it running, finally, spun the tires a little bit, and tonight we're going to go over putting some old school KC daylighters lights on the roll bar, some requisite upgrades to the wiring harness to support said lights, show you a alternator upgrade that I did to support the lights, and some various other random progress that we've made that you should see. The most important thing about tonight is it's really cold because it's wintertime in the South and I grew up here. I'm not used to it. I don't like it. So let's do something about that. Much better. So let's get to work. Clack. So, as I was pointing out things earlier, we have this mess, which has something to do with the lights. I think it's fuses and things, but I'm not really sure. So, hey Jeb, what the hell is this thing anyway?
Well, we mounted a whole bunch of fuses and a circuit breaker to the firewall so that it won't burn down. There's a 10 amp fuse for each one of the lights, a 5 amp fuse for each of the switches, and a 40 amp circuit breaker for the whole thing.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. By the way, y'all should go look at his channel. It's somewhere or down there or whatever. It's called System Anomaly. He does all kinds of weird electronic stuff. So we've got an alternator to produce power. We've got fuses and whatnot to make sure that power doesn't, explode things. Or if it's going to explode a thing, the correct thing explodes. We have big wire and stuff coming up to the battery. Now we need to run wires to the lights. Thanks. So if you're ever installing anything in a automobile specifically that takes a fairly significant amount of power, whether it's big heavy lights, whether it's a light bar assembly, high power stereo equipment, whatever, you really ought to have it set up that the main power is handled by a relay instead of piping through a little switch wherever you choose to put that. The relays are meant to handle more current than switches. You can buy switches that are meant to handle current, but this will end up making a much cleaner install for you. In this case, we've got relay for each one of the lights. So it'll be like leftmost, a little bit inside, a little bit outside, outmost, or whatever. And then switches on the dash will control pairs of these, because that's just how I particularly want to have it. You could have it that a single switch controlled all of them, or you could have one per. It's up to you. Just depends on whatever makes you happy. If you want like NASCAR lines of switches, go for it. It's your project. In this case, I want them to do it in pairs. You also want this relatively nearby your power distribution source, whether you're powering it straight off the battery or coming off of a power block. You want it to be relatively close so that you can minimize the amount of excess wiring you're doing to, again, make for a cleaner install. In our case, I'm just going to bolt it to the fender well, and then run the wires inside the truck through a grommet in the firewall. Normally, I would make a nice little hole, but some previous owner just tore a hole for random wiring that we're not sure what the purpose was, but it was nasty, so we got rid of it. We're just going to use that hole because I'm lazy. Is it doing the thing?
Yes.
Okay. All right, got to get this wiring harness fed through the firewall. This bit of it that goes inside the cabin anyway, that I believe will then come back out of the cabin and go to the lights. So all of this can just feed through nicely. end up having a nice, clean routing. In this situation, we're not making fake fancy brackets. It's just some little bitty self-tapper screws going into the fender well sheet metal because they don't really weigh anything. Don't need a whole lot of fanciness, assuming they want to cooperate. Pro tip, when you're dealing with self-tapping screws on relatively thin metal, don't bow up on them. Just get them lightly snug. Otherwise, you'll pop it and then it'll be loose forever. Okay, that is in, and now we just need to attach all the wires to where they're going. You said the black is just a ground? Should I have attached that to the back of the self-tapping screw? Shit. Okay, I can back this one out. We have our ground set. We have our relays installed. Now we run the main power wires. So for this, it's a relatively simplistic process. It's just putting blade terminals on the end of the wires, using some nice crimpers to get good positive connections. This way everything will be nice and tight and secure, but also movable and modular should things need to be worked on in the future. Pro tip of make sure that you put your sheathing, or if you're using heat shrink, put it on before you put the end on the wire. Otherwise you'll just have to take it back off again. And if you had previously cut the wire to a very specific length, it could end up being too short. But which I guess leads to a second pro tip of always leave your wires just a little bit long. You can always trim them down. It's a pain to add more.
Well, I guess I should use a slightly bigger.
I want it on the back side of this wire set. Now let's get everything attached and then we'll bundle. So as you can see here, we're affixing the loom to the rest of the wiring harness so that while they live in their home, the wires will not be stressed at the connectors or on the wires themselves at all. This will help everything stay in place longer. You won't end up having wires wear through, and you just get a much nicer, cleaner, longer lifespan out of your wiring harness.
All right. Well, you have fun.
Okay, I'll be back in just a minute.
Okay. So while he gets some food, I'm going to sit here and continue wiring. So I've already cut off the ends off the wiring that came from the firewall. These will be going into the a connector, probably this one, so that I can just connect the two, and if we ever need to replace the rest of the harness, we can do that easily and just put another plug in. And you know, I just realized it's a whole lot easier to put these little yellow, I guess, what do you call them, weather seal bits. Oh no, on these wires before you strip the copper, because you know, you can hurt yourself a little bit. Sharp copper goes into fingers, things like that. Now, I didn't put these in any particular order, mostly because as long as the inside and outside are differentiated, that's all that really matters. The extra lines of copper are just for current capacity. You can buy these things in bulk on eBay. If you search GM style connector, that's what shows up. I tend to buy them in bulk every so often.
Hold up. I'd like to take a moment here to talk a little bit more about this cool little connector. It's a design done by General Motors that is weather resistant, easy to use and put together, and most importantly, cheap. That's why we're using it here. If you would like to know even more, however, please follow the link above or in the description below to System Anomalies video where he goes into greater detail. Now back to your regularly scheduled shenanigans.
Alright, so you want to make sure you have the right connector on there. Stick this in there to where the copper. So these connectors will have two sets of, you're not going to be able to see this, two sets of wings. I'll throw some B-roll up here and I'll show you this in more detail. Two sets of wings, and these will, you want to run the copper all the way up to the first set, and the second set, the longer set here, will want to wrap around the insulation. It gives it a good solid grip on the wire, so that whenever you ultimately end up pulling on it, you're not going to be pulling the connector off of the wire, which really sucks, especially with these permanent connectors. Ooh, yeah. It's always really so satisfying doing this kind of thing. So these will usually go in with some pretty positive, action. You'll stick them in, you'll hear a click, and then when you pull back on the wire, it doesn't pop back out. That's how you know it's in the connector. And with these connectors, it's a whole lot easier to get, if it wasn't connected in there right, or you put the wrong wire in the wrong pin, you just pull this red piece out and it just comes right back out. These, you've got to be sure that what the wire you put in there is the wire that you want in there. There we go. We have one connector down. And like that, plug. We have now, we have now almost completely finished the wiring from the firewall to the lights.
So now we have wiring run through the cabin and to underneath the truck. We have a hole cut and provisioned in the bed for the wiring to come up out of into the bed. Now we need the lights mounted in place. And for this, I'm going to pretty much just roughly get them pointed forward. Later on down the road one day, I will come back, and when it's dark outside or whatever, and I've got some room, I will get them really dialed in. This is not my favorite thing to do. Hands are cramping, it's tearing up my freaking fingers.
Alright, so dashboard. Yeah, so you can see up here there's some switches. They currently don't do anything because they're not plugged up to anything. When I'm done, there'll be two of them will be plugged into the lights up above. There are wires coming out of this little panel going up into the dashboard up here. I have the correct one, I should. And let's do this. This entire project, I have done myself a favor and made pin 1 on all of these connectors ground, which then lets me put these in order. And this one is going to be ground, orange, either blue or green. I'm not entirely sure. I'll take another look before I stick them in the connector. So I keep doing this. All right, now that I have these little seals on, I can now finish doing what I was doing, which was, click. All right. Don't ever lose your piece. So whenever this plastic thing comes out, it's always a pain in the D-hole. 1 pin, 2 pin.
Red pin, blue pin.
Ah, there we go. There we go. Ha-ha! Click. Click. I think at this point I've got We got the relays done. We got the battery connector going. We've got fuse block wired. We've got the wire from the fuse block and the relays going into the vehicle. 4 of them are going out to the bed. 3 of them are going into the dashboard, into the switches. The lights need to be grounded, and we should be ready to go.
Okay. So now we have power run here in the engine bay. We have control wiring run into the truck. We've got it running into the control switches on the dash. We then come also from here running along the floor of the cabin through a grommet outside up to the lights. Theoretically speaking, this right here is the only thing stopping those lights from being powered. So the next step, now that you think that you have everything hooked up correctly, is to do the old smoke and sniff test, where we're going to put the power to it and do nothing for 30 seconds or whatever, and just see if we can tell if anything decides to immediately ignite itself. If it does, you screwed up. If it doesn't, then we can see if the lights will come on. Kitty. Hearing and smelling nothing. Let's see if they turn on. So, assuming everything works, this should be our interior pair, the middle pair. This should be the external pair. And flip. Right, look, there's lights. And flip. And more lights. I know, the truck's not on fire. This is good. Okay, lights work, which is excellent. So that job can be crossed off the board. Which brings up a thought. I haven't actually tested to see if the alternator works yet. So now that we're drawing significantly more power than we used to be, we really should verify that, which is a simple process. Take any voltmeter, put it on the battery, look at the voltage, crank the truck, and then look at the voltage again. And you should see slightly higher voltage with the truck running than without. And if you really want to, you can slowly raise the RPM and verify that as the RPMs increase, the voltage continues to increase up to 14 and some odd volts. If you get drastically more than that, you really need to shut everything down because the alternator's bad and it's overcharging, which will hurt stuff. So let's check that real quick, and then we can mark this off the board and call it an evening. Okay, so truck's off, voltmeter's hooked up. Real simple. Black to negative, red to positive. If you don't know how to use a voltmeter, please consult the Google. They will help you. With it off, we see 12.5 volts. So now we crank the truck and we should see higher voltage. Okay, so we saw more than 14 volts, which is excellent. The alternator is in fact charging correctly. So now we can drive down the road without terrible fear of the battery dying and us being stuck in the absolute middle of nowhere because of this particular problem. This does not preclude many other problems. That, however, is for another night. All right, first things first before we leave. The job's not done until now. I'm tired. Let's go home.